Welcome to another deep dive. We have a truly fascinating and I think admittedly pretty intense stack of sources to get through today.
Yeah, it's a heavy one for sure.
It really is. We are pulling from deep dive research on child psychology,
Mhm.
some incredibly sobering historical sociology, and texts that really unpack the mechanics of how criminal networks are recruiting
Mhm.
13-year-olds.
Right.
We're also looking closely at the incredibly fierce political debate happening right now around youth crime. Because when you look at the current political landscape, there is a massive vocal push to lower the age of criminal responsibility.
Yeah, in response to some very violent acts committed by minors recently.
Exactly. And proponents of this are arguing that the severity of modern crimes demands a harsher, more traditional justice system response, regardless of how old the perpetrator is.
But on the flip side,
Right. On the flip side,
yeah.
the sociologists and developmental psychologists we're looking at today are pushing back really hard against that idea. Now, before we go any further, I want to explicitly state something for you, our listener.
Mm.
These sources contain some highly politically charged material regarding criminal policy. And our goal today is absolutely not to take a side or endorse a specific viewpoint.
No, not at all.
We are simply here to act as your expert guides in partially unpacking the fascinating science and the sociological arguments that are presented in these source texts.
That's exactly right. And I'd say the mission for our deep dive today is really to synthesize what the sources say about the underlying mechanics here. We want to understand the why.
The why.
Yeah. Why are young teenagers, specifically right around that 13-year-old mark, drawn into these highly destructive environments? And equally importantly, what does the research say actually works to stop it?
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the biology.
Yeah,
Because if you really want to understand the actions of the 13-year-old, you have to look inside their head.
you really do.
You can't just map adult logic onto a middle schooler. The texts make it very clear that a 13-year-old's brain is fundamentally biologically different from yours or mine. They're right in the thick of early puberty.
And the neurobiology detailed in the research is just fascinating. At 13, the brain is dealing with a massive imbalance. You have the amygdala.
Which is the emotional core, right?
Exactly. It's the center for fear, reward, emotional reactions. At 13, that amygdala is hyperactive. It's highly sensitive. But the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for logic, planning, and risk assessment.
The brain's management center.
Right, the management center. That part is not fully developed yet. It's still very much under construction.
There is a brilliant analogy in the source material that paints a perfect picture of this. They say, think of a teenager's brain as a car. The hyperactive emotional center is a massive gas pedal, completely driven by immediate emotional and social rewards. So they crave the thrill, they desperately want social status, but they are essentially slamming their foot on this gas pedal without the brakes of a fully formed adult control system.
The brakes just haven't been installed yet, and that connects directly to how we have to view their decision making.
How so?
Well, because they physically lack the fully developed neural pathways to weigh long-term risks against short-term gains, their actions are governed by the immediate moment. Which brings up the issue of financial incentives.
Right, the money.
Yeah. While kids obviously understand what money is, they know what a new phone costs, their ability to actually comprehend the life-altering risk of a violent action in exchange for that money is highly limited.
I want to bring up a specific example from the text here because I think it challenges a really common assumption. Let's say a 13-year-old is offered 2,000 SEK or even 20,000 to 50,000 SEK to commit a violent act.
Which is a huge amount of money.
It is. To an adult, that's a massive calculated bribe.
Yeah.
But the sources emphasize that the money alone rarely buys the behavior from the teenager.
It doesn't.
Financial gain is actually far less effective than other psychological triggers. Which seems counterintuitive, right? If they have this massive gas pedal for immediate reward, why doesn't cash just override everything?
Because the cash is just the initial hook. It gets their attention, but it doesn't ensure obedience when things get genuinely terrifying. When self-preservation kicks in, cash isn't enough to force a child to commit violence.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm.
Because if it's not the money driving the recruitment, what is it? And the sources point to something much darker.
Social pressure and fear.
Yes.
The sociologists in our sources draw some really sobering historical parallels to explain this. They point to data from conflicts worldwide, specifically looking at the recruitment of child soldiers in places like Africa and Latin America.
And what does that data show?
It shows that children in those horrifying environments rarely take on dangerous missions voluntarily just for cash or extra food. That's a myth. Their obedience is actually driven by a profound fear of authority figures.
Which is a chilling reality to map onto modern urban gang recruitment. The sources highlight that threatening to harm a child's close relatives, saying they'll go after a mom, a dad, or a sibling.
Wait, that changes everything.
Completely. The texts say that kind of threat has a massively stronger psychological effect than any monetary reward ever could.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how deliberate this is. Kids at this age are highly susceptible to older individuals who step in and act as leaders, or who offer a twisted version of family.
They exploit that underdeveloped impulse control.
Exactly. They offer the illusion of belonging, and then they drop the hammer with threats against the child's real family to trap them. And the texts are clear that this manipulation often results in severe, lifelong trauma for the child.
Because their baseline sense of safety is just completely shattered.
Absolutely.
Now, we also have to talk about the environment where a lot of this vulnerability is amplified. The sources dive into the role of social media.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge factor.
We know 13-year-olds are incredibly sensitive to social signals. And the texts show they face this intense, constant pressure to dress a certain way, act a certain way, or look a certain way just to gain status.
It's exhausting for them. And if you take that intense sensitivity to social signals and you pair it with a lack of safety or strong finances at home, the false sense of belonging and power that a gang offers becomes very tempting.
It's a toxic shortcut to status.
Precisely.
So, what does this all mean when it comes to how society reacts? Because naturally, adults and governments are terrified by this violence.
They are, and that brings us back to the political debate we mentioned in the intro.
Right.
The sources spend a lot of time impartially detailing the arguments against lowering the age of criminal responsibility.
Let's walk through those arguments.
The texts argue that the political proposal to put 13-year-olds in prison is driven much more by fear from society and the government than by actual effectiveness.
Because the data doesn't support it working as a deterrent.
According to the developmental psychologists and sociologists in these texts, no, it doesn't. They note that treating kids with harsh punishments and moral preaching actually increases their alienation and anger.
Which just makes the destructive behavior worse.
Right. It reinforces the gang's narrative that society hates them and the gang is their only real family.
And the sources provide a really interesting specific claim regarding how this is handled in Sweden right now.
Yes, they do.
According to the texts, Sweden currently has 13 as the lowest age for penal responsibility. But the system focuses heavily on care over prison.
They use specialized care facilities rather than adult-style incarceration. The argument presented in the research is that a care-focused model actually addresses the psychological trauma and the biological immaturity of the child.
Instead of just punishing a brain that physically hasn't finished developing yet.
Exactly.
I want to shift our focus now, enthusiastically, to the practical takeaways for you listening. Because the research does give us concrete answers. How do we spot this recruitment, and what actually works to stop it?
The texts list some very clear warning signs that a 13-year-old might be being groomed or threatened.
What's the first one?
The first major red flag is a sudden shift in social circles. You see a 13-year-old suddenly hanging out with older people that they clearly idolize.
Right, a skewed power dynamic.
Yes. Another sign is an obsessive hunt for status. That might manifest as suddenly showing up with expensive new clothes, multiple phones, or entirely new identities that don't fit who they were a month ago.
And what about the fear aspect we talked about?
That's the third major sign, showing sudden, intense fear, excessive secrecy, and unexplained worry for their family's safety.
Because they're internalizing those threats against their parents or siblings.
Exactly. That is a massive indicator of being actively threatened.
Okay, so if those are the warning signs, let's break down the concrete solutions provided in the text. Because according to both the historical and the psychological research, prevention is far more effective than punishment.
Infinitely more effective. And the texts go into detail about protective factors.
This part blew me away.
Right. The absolute biggest defense against a child being recruited is having at least one reliable adult in their life. Just one.
One stable person to anchor them.
That's it. Mentorship is crucial here. The sources specifically highlight formal programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters in the US and similar models across Europe.
Because those programs actively replace the negative influence of the older gang members with positive adult role models.
They provide the safety and belonging the child's brain is biologically craving, but in a healthy way.
The sources also strongly advocate for a shift in how society's macro resources are spent.
Yes, they argue that instead of spending resources punishing the exploited children, society should be aggressively spending that money to stop the adult recruiters.
Directing police and social programs at the top of the chain.
Right. Go after the adults orchestrating the exploitation, and simultaneously take the resources and strengthen care facilities like the SIS homes in Sweden to help the victims.
Address the root cause and heal the trauma, rather than locking up the symptom.
Exactly the argument the texts are making.
To give a quick summary of the core message we've unpacked today, a 13-year-old's brain is uniquely wired for connection, status, and emotional responses. It's a gas pedal without brakes. And that biological reality makes them incredibly vulnerable to older recruiters who use fear, threats against family, and fake belonging, rather than just cash to control them.
And the reason this matters to you as you listen to this is that understanding these biological and social realities allows us to look past the fear-driven headlines.
It changes the lens completely.
It really does. It allows you to critically evaluate these intense political debates about youth, crime, and punishment. And maybe most importantly, it highlights the incredible power of simply being a stable, supportive adult in a young person's life.
It's something anyone could do.
It is. And as we close out, I want to leave you with a final thought to explore on your own, building on the source material we've gone through today.
Let's hear it.
This raises a really important question. If a 13-year-old's brain is biologically wired to seek social belonging and status above almost all logic, and their physical environments are lacking those safe spaces,
Right.
how much faster might this dangerous recruitment happen entirely in the digital world, where the illusion of family and status can be manufactured perfectly by anonymous recruiters?
Wow. That is an incredibly sobering thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us as we navigated this intense but vital deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.